200 very often, Raylene. Just the American trials this year and now here.
She hasn't raced too many 400s either, but she's been brilliant over those. She's just an enormous talent. Telling someone in the audience to be quiet there.
So Jones in 5, that's 4 from the left, and Melinda Gainsford-Taylor 3 from the right, down low.
Pintasevich is worth watching in lane 6. She's very tight, and I don't think she's running that well at all, but quite a comparison in style.
Away, Jones out well, Gainsford-Taylor reasonably away, and Koo's a fast starter, so Gainsford-Taylor's got something to look at. Pintasevich joined by Jones. Melinda's about 4th into the straight. A bit of work to do, but she had a good bend. Jones clearly in front. Gainsford-Taylor's up for 2nd. Good running here. Pintasevich and Nkoo, and Melinda's going to come away with a very good result. Marion just in front. Melinda's going to pip her, baby, just for the record. 22.50. Marion easing up. And behind them, Pintasevich and Nkoo. Marion may have allowed Melinda to get her right on the line. It'd be lovely if she did, as I said, just for the record books. Nearly a dead heat. And she's got her. 22.49 the Aussie and 22.50 Marion.
That's excellent running for Melinda. Good on her. She's stepped it up again from this morning.
And Pat, that's a nice scalp to have. Doesn't matter how you get it sometimes. 22.49's a fast time.
22.49, you had a smile on your face before the race. I bet you've got a smile on your face now too.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with that. Just to get out and get through the next round.
Ran a great bend again and finished it off.
Yeah, it's a nice change to finish it off, actually. I know Marion's got a long jump next, so but still, it's just great to get out there and enjoy myself. And now I'm getting ready for tomorrow night.
Anytime you can say you've got Marion Jones as a scalp, though, in any race, it's not too bad.
Oh, I'm not getting carried away with that. She was just cooling down, but hey, I'm having a ball, Pat. It's great.
Well, you're making sure that we're all having a ball here too. You're keeping us all entertained. Best of luck tomorrow. I'll see you in the semi.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right, Mel, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Hayden. Thanks for having me.
So our listeners would have heard a little bit of an intro to your second round of the 200-meter sprint at the Sydney 2000 Olympics, where you beat Marion Jones. She eased up a little bit at the start, but what an incredible time in your life.
Look, it really was. And it's funny, when I do my talks or presentations, I show that vision. And as I said it was in the second round of the 200 meters, not the final. But it was a pretty magical moment, because actually being, I was lucky it was my 3rd Olympics, but to actually have an Olympics in your own city was pretty incredible. And I remember that moment because it was like 110,000 people there, and like 100,000 of them seemed to be Australians. So they were so supportive. But I just remember coming off that bend, and you're right, Marion was slowing down, and I thought, should I try and get her? And I thought, why not? And I picked her on the line, which I think was a bit of a surprise to her as well. I laughed because Bruce McAvaney goes, I think she was slowing down. I was like, no kidding. But it was just afterwards, just the hype, and everyone got excited about it. And it was actually a lot of fun. It was a very memorable moment.
And I was think 4 years old at the time, so I can't truly appreciate, your seeing your athleticism and that. But I was actually at the Olympics there at the track. So I'm sure, you were doing the rounds then, but it feels like a long time.
Do you remember it?
I've got some photos from that Mum showed me with my cousins at the Olympics.
Nice.
But I can't. There's not much I can only relive it through the videos, and seeing that footage as we've discussed. It was awesome. Like just seeing you coming around the bend at that speed, and then pipping her right at the end. But that kind of leads me into what we're going to talk about next, which is, I want to explore a lot about your achievements throughout your career, which has been, there's a massive amount of awesome achievements. But also we want to talk about, as the saying goes, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. And there's always a plethora of different challenges and hurdles that you've had to overcome in your career. And as we spoke about before we went on air today, one of those pillars of the Normalist podcast is lessons learnt through tough life experiences and sacrifices. And you've had to make a hell of a lot of different sacrifices and had to overcome a whole host of different barriers. How did this helped you overcome a lot of you overcame a lot of these barriers through a steely determination that you built from a young age. So we just talked briefly about Sydney Olympics in 2000. With Marion Jones, she was the first woman to win 5 track and field medals at a single Olympic Games, and at the time she was really the bee's knees of the female short distance track athletes, wasn't she?
Yeah, she definitely was. She was pretty incredible. She won the 100 meters by at least five meters. And I do even remember getting to the end of the Olympics, because I did a lot of races myself. I ran a 100, a 200, did the rounds, 3 rounds of the 100, 4 rounds of the 200, the 4x1. Actually, unfortunately, I didn't get to run that really because the baton got dropped, which was devastating. But the 4x4, and I just remember being at the warm-up track, being exhausted and feeling tired. And I'm thinking, she's done all this, all this competitions, all that, plus long jump as well. And she looked as fresh as a daisy in comparison to me. So yes, and now we know, because she got caught for systematic doping. It's all come out now, and now that explains why she was probably able to handle that sort of work. But she was pretty phenomenal. And you sometimes look back when you think of these athletes who make these choices of taking drugs, and you're thinking, well, you won by 5 meters in the 100 meters. Maybe you could have just won by 200ths of a second. So, she was obviously a really talented athlete as well.
Yeah, and I don't want to focus too much on Marion's fall from grace, but I also do want to touch on, as you said, she later admitted to doping. But how that experience impacted you, less so, focusing on Marion, but kind of that experience for you. It must be hard, putting all that work and effort into your training, reaching the heights of an Olympic Games or your 3rd Olympic Games, and then finding out later that one of your competitors has been taking performance enhancing drugs. Did that impact you in any way, psychologically, or looking back on things? Do you have a negative approach to that kind of thoughts in that regard?
Well, I think one of the things is, she wasn't one of the first. I've competed over the years, and there have been athletes, even from a young age that I competed against that had been caught for drugs. And I think that's one of the things you realize as an athlete, is that some people try to take shortcuts and try to cheat. And it can be really hard. It can be hard when it can be hard in the sense that people might end up getting that medal over you who have taken drugs, but unfortunately you can't control that. And then you have to make a decision very young to think, okay, well, I can't control what they can do. I can only control what I can do. And you've got to set your own goals with that. And, that decision had to be made for me for my first Olympics when I was 20 years old. You're not naive enough to think that everybody is playing by the rules. Unfortunately, that's life. People don't always play by the rules, but the thing is that you can, and you can put in that hard work and those sacrifices. And then when you do achieve them, then you can feel good about it, because, you've done it the right way, you've done it the hard way. And I truly believe that, and I think, it just goes to show that it happened to Marion. Things will eventually catch up to you in one way or another. So in the end, I think it's best to be honest, work hard, do the best you can. And that's what's really important.
Almost cheating yourself, aren't you? When
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like even if you're at, I always say this with kids sometimes, if they're, playing games, or, they're going off earlier before the other kid, or if the kid across country wants to cut ahead to win, you're actually not doing yourself any favors by any means. So it's just by playing by the rules, I think, is really important. And it's funny because I coach kids now. Even with little things in games, I go, no, we don't do that. It's cheating. I think it's really important for them to realize that you should do the right thing, and that if you do the right thing and you reap the rewards afterwards, then it's just so much more satisfying.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is you were also voted in as the kind of the leader for the female cohort of Olympians at Sydney 2000, and you must have had a level of respect for her as well, and her athleticism, and looked up to her at certain times throughout your career. So, having that encounter, I'm sure there were plenty of races where you were up against her, and, is looking back on things now, has it taught you a lot about, like we just spoke about how, not taking shortcuts and how you're educating the next generation, but has it influenced, your future, your life moving forward, like in your teachings, not only to kids, but kind of that you've adopted yourself?
But look, I am a big believer on, you reap what you sow, definitely. And I think that's what it's sort of shown with her. Mind you, you travel around the world and you compete against athletes around the world. And she was actually one of the friendly ones, the nicer ones, I have to admit, as an athlete. But I think I think that's the pure example, to be honest with you, that it does catch up with you. And like at the time, I mean, you wouldn't remember because you're 4 years old, but her then boyfriend, CJ Hunter, had been caught for drugs at Sydney Olympics. And there was, talk around everything, obviously, with Marion being his girlfriend. There was, people were saying things. Obviously, it was never proven then, but I think in the end, if you really could be bothered enough to look into all the notes, etc., and the stories of what happened, it proved to be right. But it's just, I think one of the things is now my role is as a coach, and I love coaching kids. And it's not just about giving them the right programming, it's about mentoring them, helping them, teaching them from right from wrong. And, that's the role that I really love to play as well. And, you can tell stories like that. And I think someone told me the other day, Marion was actually, going into schools and talking to kids in schools and about making good choices now. So I think that's a really good life lesson for everyone to learn.
Yeah, it's a bit sad looking back on it. I think the father of her first child and her ex-husband were both caught for doping in those games as well. So it's quite a
they did. Yeah, later on. Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of the drug testing now, what was it like back then, being an athlete, being drug tested, and how has this changed to now?
Well, back then, I'll have to tell you, one of my first drug tests, and for your listeners to be able to hear this, what you have to do. So when you go in, you have to do a urine test, and you have to have a chaperone there to make sure that you're not tampering with that in any way. So they're actually watching you urinate into a cup. That's probably getting a bit too full on. But my first one was in Bulgaria and Plovdiv, and that was probably the scariest one because I was in the under 20s. And over there, they didn't have proper toilets. They just had a hole in the ground. So that experience wasn't that great for me, being my first. And being on my own, of course, you had an Athletics Australia representative, but it's a bit tough. But what they seem to have done now, I don't know all the intricate details of it because I'm coaching kids, so I'm not really involved with the older athletes who are getting drug tested yet. But they also have biological passports now. So they do blood tests, whereas in our day they just did urine tests. Now they do blood tests. They have a biological passport. So it's more sophisticated now in watching and hopefully, catching the cheats. But in saying that, we had that situation with Russia only, would be 2 years ago, I suppose now, where we saw at what extent they went to get away with, making sure their athletes were getting away with taking drugs and not being caught. So sometimes, and I think that's one of the things that came out of the Marion Jones thing in the Balco laboratory, sometimes the pharmacists are ahead of the like a SADA or WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Association. Sometimes they're a little bit ahead of everybody else. So, it can take a while for people to catch up to what some of these people are trying to do to cheat.
Yeah, and I guess like moving away from that now and trying not to focus on, I guess, the doping and drug testing, but more so on what you've actually achieved and where you've been in your career, because we've talked about Sydney 2000, and 2000 was a sensational year for you. But you also competed at Barcelona in 1992 and then Georgia in 1996?
That's right, Atlanta, yes, 1996.
Sorry, Atlanta.
Yeah, look, it was fantastic. It was, I suppose my first Olympics is, the one you really remember. And I think I tell a lot of I do these Mel GT speed clinics. So I get to talk about it quite regularly because I have a chat to the kids about my first experience. Because, usually I ask the kids, who would like to be at the Olympics one day. And a lot of them put their hands up. And, I was just a country kid, running around the farm who also had a dream of doing it. So the moment that you actually turn up to your first Olympic Games, but the most amazing thing, and I feel for those athletes who didn't get to experience this because of COVID, is being part of that opening ceremony at Olympics, and there's a moment where you're all lining up underneath the stadium to walk out into the stadium, and you take this moment where you look down and you go, oh my gosh, I'm wearing an Olympic uniform. You go, wow, I'm an Olympian. And then, I tell the story about walking out into the stadium for the first time, and you look up into the crowd to see where all the Australians are. And there was this one group of Australians that were there, because you look for the green and gold or the Australian flag, but there was this one woman that had this Akubra hat, and she's jumping up and down. And you know what? Out of 60,000 people, it was my mum. So that was a pretty special moment. It's like, hey, mum, I'm at the Olympics. So that was that was an amazing Olympics. It was a very good experience. I was so nervous. Oh my gosh, my first 100, I was so nervous. But as I say to all the young athletes, that's all, more experience you have. Like by the time I got to Sydney Olympics, I was just loving life and waving to the crowd. And, I've been there, done that. So I knew how to handle that. Atlanta Olympics, I had a bulging disc in my back. I still ran, but I did that 6 weeks out of those Olympics because they weren't probably as memorable. They're still Olympics, don't get me wrong, but it was a bit of a struggle, that one, going into those Olympics. But then to finish off with Sydney was, pretty special.
We'll come back to your injuries, and that's been another big hurdle in your career that you've had to overcome. But how, as you were saying there, how did things change from Barcelona to Sydney? Because, like, I know being a young star, lining up on the blocks at your school swimming carnival, I remember the first few, you'd be so nervous and you'd have butterflies. You like sometimes you'd jump in the pool early or you'd have a false start or whatnot. How did you control that emotion in Barcelona? And as you said, how did things change? Did you just enjoy yourself more, or was it, that state anxiety, ability to manage your state anxiety better?
Look, there's a whole lot of factors that are in it. The first time, I think I had to just really reset, when I was at the starting blocks, because you just got to sit there and go, I had the fastest woman in the world next to me in my heat, which was a good start. But you have to sit there and reset and think about, and that's one thing I love about the 100 meters. It's so raw. You just have that one moment and you can't mess it up because it's over in such a small amount of time. But I had to just remember, think of the process, and that's what you got to do. You got to realize that's what you train those hours and hours for, to be able to. And that's a hard thing too, is your first time you're there is not being aware of what's around you, trying to be fully focused on exactly what you need to do, how you needed to execute the race. But again, when I ran my first heat, then I ran the second round and it was easier. And so as you went through that first Olympics, every race got easier. And I'd even, we had our New South Wales state junior championships last weekend. And all my athletes are saying the first race is always the hardest, but once you get that out of the way, then the other one becomes easier. And that's exactly what it was like at the Olympics. You just learn to, over time, control those nerves. Nerves are good because it means you care, but you learn to control them and try to use them more at your advantage rather than as a disadvantage.
It's a good lesson for anything in life, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Runs on the board.
Yeah, and you know what it's all about too? And this is what I say, and I've learned that as an athlete that I do, whether I'm doing, I was doing some work on television, whether I'm doing an MC job or when I was doing public speaking, it's all about preparation. So the more prepared you are, the more confident you are. And that's, you can go in there with a lot more confidence, and then that's going to give you a really good performance too. So if you go in completely prepared and no matter what you do, then it's going to make a really big difference.
And so 2000 was a really big year for you as well. So it wasn't just your last Olympics, but as we said before, you were female captain of the Olympic squad, which would have made that whole moment, with your mum in the crowd in the Akubra and the opening ceremony that much more sweeter. But, Yeah, so you finished 5th in the 200 overall, which is still an insane achievement.
Yeah.
But you also, in the inaugural Test series in South Africa, you anchored the female 4x100 to gold, and you also broke a new Australian record, which I understand is still standing today.
Yep, the women's 4x1. Yes, I truly believe it's going to get beaten soon, the record, because we've got this incredible young crop of athletes that is definitely going to break it. But yes, at the moment it's still there. That's right.
And so, in that year, it must have been a great way to, obviously not the end of your career, but to see things out on such a high. We talk a lot about rugby league players and footballers, when's like the perfect moment to go out when they've won a premiership, or, to look back on things with good memories of success. Do you think that's influenced the way you look back on your career now?
Look, definitely. Like, one of the things was for me going to Sydney is, and I know we're going to talk about injuries later, but I had this terrible knee injury when I was running at the Commonwealth Games and my knee collapsed. And anyway, I had to have surgery, and they actually thought that I'd never be able to sprint again, which they didn't tell me at the time, which was really smart. But I spent 18 months making this comeback, and the great thing was that I had the Sydney Olympics there. That was inspiring me. And one of the things, and a lot of you listeners would be knowing this in life, when something you love is taken away from you, you realize how much you love it. So when making that Sydney Olympics was incredibly special. So I just enjoyed every moment to be back running again. And like, people think that running's just this simple thing. Yes, it is, but there's something incredible when you've got, when you're an athlete, that you run with very little effort, if that makes sense. You can run really fast and it doesn't take a lot of effort. And that's the key to trying to be a great sprinter. And when you've come off an injury, that's really hard. Running's hard work. But when it clicks, that's when it feels special again. So when I finally got that back, feeling as though I could run at that level again with very little effort, the Sydney Olympics was just a pure joy for me. I've got all these photos people have given me over the time, and you just see me smiling in every photo. So I was just loving life. It was so good.
And we'll talk more about, when you said injuries, I'm going to talk to you more about, I guess, the psychology of it too, because we know there's obviously coming back from an injury and rehabbing your injury is a very physical thing. But also psychologically, it can be really hard, fear avoidance and, for instance, going back into, full speed running can be, just as much you thinking about the injury as actually, re-injuring yourself. So there's a lot to think about. It's very complex, and I'm sure you're going to have some good insights for everyone that's listening. In terms of when you started running, that was back in Narromine, where you grew up in central west New South Wales. You were 9 years old when the legendary Olympic coach Jackie Byrnes stumbled upon you. Can you tell us a little bit about that stage in your life and what you remember about Jackie?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I grew up on a sheep and wheat farm, and like my brother, my brother David, him and I, would work on the farm, we'd round up the sheep. It was really quite funny, because even then I was quite competitive and tried to beat the sheepdogs, which of course I never did. And then I went to school in Narromine when I was in primary school. I was in kindergarten. I beat a couple of kids. I beat some kids who were a couple of years older than me. So this man called Gary came up to mum and dad and said, "Why don't you get involved in little athletics?" And I thought, okay. So they came and spoke to me, and I thought, oh, that sounds good. Somewhere I can go and run each week. So I joined little athletics and I loved it. And then of course, the next thing you need, if you want to be able to improve in it, you need to train. So I tell the story that, this big city coach came to town. Her name's Jackie Byrnes, as you said. And she ended up being at the time, New South Wales Little Athletics coaching director. And she coached other kids in the area by correspondence. So I was at the age, I think it was about 8.5. And I remember getting her number and calling her up and said, "Hello, Jackie Byrnes. My name's Melinda Gainsford." I said, "Would you please coach me?" So my mum and dad made me do it. And she said, well, I'll come down and have a look at you at Little Athletics on Saturday. So it was Trengy Little Athletics. So Trengy's even a smaller town in Narromine. So I went there on the Saturday, was really nervous, took off, showed off like no tomorrow, doing all the things you shouldn't, looking around, etc. And then she said, I'll give you a call. And honestly, it felt like hours and hours, but she finally called me and she said, Mel, I'd love to coach you. So we were athlete and coach together for 23 years and went to those 3 Olympics together. So it was a very, very special partnership. And yeah, she's like a second mum to me. So it's something that I'm really proud of from the both of us, actually. Yeah, she's gorgeous.
I can imagine that'd be such a special relationship to spend that long and to go from 9 years old through to your 3 Olympics, as we spoke about with Barcelona, Atlanta, Sydney.
Yeah, it's pretty special.
In terms of after meeting Jackie, you moved to Potts Point and you're boarding at St Vincent's to progress your career. What was it like moving from Western New South Wales to the big smoke at such a young age? How was that?
It was pretty hard, actually. One of the things that people don't really realize is that running is a very technical event. So when for me to improve, I needed to be with Jackie. So, in the old days, we didn't have our iPhones like you do now, and you can, sit there and send videos left, right, and center of an athlete. So I had to be with Jackie. I did find it very hard at St Vincent's because, people listening, Potts Point's right next to King's Cross. I've gone from thousands of acres to an area that was very small. I got very homesick as well. And then when I was because of 14, I was running, pretty well. At the time, I ran like a 23.8, which was a very quick time. And then I went through a massive growth spurt, and this is the beginning of my injuries we keep talking about. And I got stress fractures in my shins, and I was out of the sport for 2 years. So I found that time really difficult. I actually call it my beach ball phase because I took comfort in boarding school food and also in canteen food or tuck shop food, we used to call it.
Like we all did, really?
Yeah, that's right. And then because I couldn't do sport, I was away from home. I couldn't do sport. I couldn't do what I loved for 2 years. So that was a really, really tough time. But I do look back on it now, and I always say, and I tell everyone this, it was only probably because of Jackie that I kept in the sport, because she never gave up on me. She kept on going, okay, let's try and get into the pool. When you do have injuries, there's a lot of other cross training that you can do to help you to get back and get fitting. So she get fit again. So she never gave up on me. So yeah, I was very lucky to have her there.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. And I guess moving to Potts Point, were you running at ES Marks or where were you?
No, I actually had to. They were really big into study time. So I literally only had 40 minutes to study, and it took me 10 minutes to walk down to Rushcutters Bay Oval, and then 10 minutes to walk back. So there wasn't a whole lot of training going on. Things are very different to these days. I mean, you wouldn't have that situation. You would be able to go to probably ES Marks and stuff. But no, I was doing it on a nice, it was a very pretty oval, mind you. Things I saw on the way down there was interesting, I have to admit, being in King's Cross. But yeah, no.
And you had a rapid rise to success. You were at the age of 14, you were the ranked world number 1 for the 100-meter sprint, female sprinters at just age 14. Was that wasn't overall, was it? That was for your age category, was it?
Yeah, it was for my age category. Yeah. And I think I don't know if it was the 100 or the 200, but one of those events. Yes, I was at the time. Yeah. So yeah, but then I just, this is the thing, and I'm noticing it too with a lot of young athletes, things can change as you go through puberty and going through growth spurts and things like that. You just got to be very careful within those times just to make sure you protect yourself. And, I'm learning that as a coach now with my athletes, learning what to do and not to do throughout at those times, because, our bodies are changing and there's so much going on.
things like early specialization now are such a big thing as well.
Yeah,
In,
yeah,
you look at
things are.
you look at young
that-
gymnasts as well, and the number of injuries they develop because they
Mhm.
specialize in their sport at such an early age. So
Yeah, it's funny, but then sometimes too, what I find with athletes, like with a lot of the young ones, that especially if they can run, they do so many sports, and which is great. You should do a lot of sports, but the problem is if they get into these teams or rep teams, no other coaches are asking what that athlete had done the day before. So, for example, if an athlete comes to me, I'll go, "What are you doing all week? What did you do all weekend?" Well, they had a whole day of, doing gala days. They shouldn't probably be training with me. And that's what's hard when they're doing a whole lot of sports, because they're all training them hard. But the problem, if you're doing 3 or 4 sports, then they're all training hard. So that's not good either. So there's a real fine line, I must admit. It's got to be a bit of a balance.
yeah, and so I guess that leads into looking at teams and team sports now, and sports scientists, physiotherapists, remedial massage, team head doctors. What was it like back when you were competing? Did you have those professionals around you to give you the support that you needed like they do now? Is things
Not till later. I honestly think that I didn't go to a physio until I was like 20, 21. Like now I've got a lot of athletes, even my own daughter, they end up being at physio or getting massages. And but like things have changed a lot, like information's changed a lot. That's them being able to do that is actually helping in injury prevention. It's them being smart about what they need to do is so much better now. I think the education out there is so much better. But then you see things change too. You see warm-ups change to static stretches, to dynamic stretches, do this, do that. I've seen all sorts of, theories that have happened, and then sometimes they come full circle and they say, this is good, oh no, this is good. And I think that's just the way life goes. They find out, they do studies. They'll go with one theory and then sometimes they change and they go with another theory. It is interesting.
The static stretching before, your events, was that a thing back then? And has that
Yeah.
obviously changed a lot now? It's more
now it's more dynamic and do it more at the end as well, with static stretches. So yeah, things have definitely changed. But then also too, you've got to that's not doing it. I think just generally everyone's different too, and you've got to get to know your athlete or as well, because some things work for one and not necessarily for the other. So yes, but generally it's now trying to get them off their phone and roll in between sets rather than being on their phone.
Facebook and TikTok.
Yeah, let's get a roller instead, and let's roll our legs while we've got our 6-minute rest.
So injuries plagued your early career. So we talked a little bit before about some of them, but can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of some of the hurdles you've experienced with injuries?
Well, the one I just spoke about, that was a pretty big one when I was a teenager, so 2 years out of the sport. The hard thing about that, it took a long time to diagnose it, because now, you got MRIs and, with just those days, you just sort of, I think, had x-rays or I think the technology wasn't that great. So that was a really big one. Atlanta, just doing a gym session, I got a bulging disc in my L4. So that was a bit of an issue, and it got to the stage, I'll never forget, I couldn't run the 100 there, but I ran the 200, and I'll never forget walking over to the 200 meters and thinking I haven't been able to do block starts for 6 weeks, which is a bit of a problem when you're in Olympics. I did reasonably well considering. I also too had a big tape straight across my stomach in a cross mode, because every time I would hyperextend my back, it would mean that it would put pressure on that bulging disc. So they put this tape across my stomach. So every time I ran, I had this massive tape. So that actually got just as sore as my stomach as it did my back in the end, because of the amount of tape that had to get ripped on and off. But the things you do, like, you don't care.
So just as like a deterrent, was it?
Yeah, it's just to make sure you weren't hyperextending, which was causing a lot of problems. And then my really big one was the Commonwealth Games when I was winning a gold medal and my knee collapsed. But that knee issue started 6 weeks earlier, and that was a pretty tough one, actually, come through that. But yeah, and then coming off the back of that and working towards the Sydney Olympics, which I shared a little bit earlier on. That was really challenging, but again, very rewarding, and that's what people go, what makes you keep going? You keep going because you love the sport. Secondly, you always remember the good times and you want to get that feeling again. And luckily I got that chance to get that feeling again. And it's just so rewarding. I just think resilience is key with everybody, with our young athletes, our older athletes. And one thing about injuries, it does make you resilient. And I think you need to experience it to a certain level just to, because it's tough. But if you can avoid it, obviously it's a very good thing as well.
Do you think you would have pulled the plug if the doctor said you could never compete again?
No, probably not. I still would have tried for sure. But luckily they didn't tell me that at the time. Yeah. But it was frustrating time though. Like I'd tell the story of going back to the track and then I'm running and I'm thinking I'm not limping, and Jackie would laugh at me, in a nice way. I go, I'm not limping, am I? She goes, oh yeah, you are so limping. And then finally getting back to running, and then like having 10-year-old kids beating me, and then they'd go to class the next day and they go, guess what, Mel? I told everyone in show and tell. This is a 28-year-old woman who's trying to beat a 10-year-old. It was definitely challenging. It'll be interesting to think. I think I'd still, if the Olympics was somewhere else, I would have still given it a crack because you're a long time retired anyway. It was just rewarding. It was so much fun. It really was.
But to think coming through that and then to have such a phenomenal year in 2000, it must be satisfying to think about, coming through those injuries. What would you say, pin your hat on in terms of what was the most effective, whether it be strategy, or did you develop some sort of thought process, or, how did you overcome those injuries in order to have such a fantastic year in that 2000?
Well, I'm a big fan of having a plan of attack. And I think that's what you need. And that's one of the things I notice with my athletes when things aren't going well, is that you've got to go, okay, this is our plan. And you can't look at the bigger picture. And it's a cliche. It's one of the biggest in sport, but it's true. You just got to take every day at a time. And I think that it was really key for me. And people who are listening have probably gone through this. Sometimes you go 3 steps, 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. And that's the frustrating thing. It really is. But the one thing, and I'm going through this with my daughter at the moment, who's also running, is that you've really got to listen to your body. That's what you do. I mean, we all want to do stuff. We want to be part of everything. We don't want to miss out. But you really have to listen to your body and be smart with it. And and I think that's really key. So if you've got good people around you managing that, and luckily I did, I had some really good people managing that with me, then it can make a really massive difference too. But it's like, when you go to a physio and a physio says you have to do these exercises, well, you probably get about 80% of people walking away and they don't do those exercises. You actually have to do those exercises. So it's all for a reason. So it's the 1%ers that makes the biggest difference. You should, and people don't think it's a big deal, but it actually is a really big deal. It's really important to do.
We talked about the physios, the physiologists, the sports scientists, the doctors. There's more of the psychology. So we've actually had a few guests on the podcast already. One of those was John Novak, and he's working with the Seagulls and a whole host of different athletes like James Magnuson, the swimmer. He talked a lot about, performance psychology. Did you ever employ anyone to help you in that respect? Was there any?
I did. I think, yes, I had a sports psychologist. I actually had one going into Sydney. He was very good. Sometimes, I did find, I think you've got to find the right one. I've had been with some in the past, it didn't quite work for me. But I think it is really important because it's just giving you strategies on how to deal with certain things and how to overcome that. And I, like, even for myself as a coach, like, I have to be very careful with my athletes, because even if they're going into, say, a competition, you can't give them too much dialogue, because if you give them too much dialogue, they just overthink it. I have to give them that dialogue when we're in training. You can't do it on day of competition. So you learn about all those sort of things to help them, you know, rather than think of let the brain do its action, you know, don't overthink it, and whatever we need. And there's things I'll see sometimes in their warm up, but I'm not going to tell them, because if they get out there in the start and they're thinking about that, they're going to miss the start, and they're not going to run well. So you have to be, psychology is key. Confidence is key. If you've got confidence, then anything is possible. If you have self-doubt, then you're going to struggle a bit. So it's being able to get everyone in that position, all of us into that position where we're prepared and confident enough to get out there and do the best we can.
Execute. Yep.
Execute. Yep.
In terms of typical training week, I think this is something that the listeners would be interested in hearing about, but kind of less so about your meso or macro cycles, but more those micro cycles. So what would a typical training week look like for an elite sprinter?
When I was running, elite sprint, it depends. So, okay, so I trained twice a day, and I ended up training 6 days a week. Finally, at the end of my career, I got Sundays off, which was awesome. It took a long time to do that. I was like, thanks, Jackie. I think when I was younger, she just wanted to make sure I didn't go out on a Saturday night. Just joking. So it'd be twice a week, and then it would just mix it up. So I would do sometimes boxing sessions. You know, I'd do probably 3 track sessions a week, 2 weight sessions a week. I'd do stretching sessions, Swiss ball sessions, pool sessions, and it'd be morning and night. So it is really full time, because, you know, you do a session for an hour or 2 hours in the morning, you have to recover to then back up being at the track and doing whatever you need to do at night. So it's luckily I eventually got to become a full-time athlete. I went to an Olympics, a World Indoor Championships, a Commonwealth Games, and then I finally became a full-time athlete. So it was pretty tough in those days. You have to be very careful, because it's all about recovery as well as doing, you know, your big sessions. So you're probably training 30 hours a week. So it's a lot of hard work on your body, for sure. And the thing is, to improve, this is the thing, to improve, you need to train harder. And sometimes when you train harder, your body just can't handle it. And I found that when you get older, sometimes it becomes less is more as well. So it's just learning all of that along the way and having your experiences, because experience is everything. You learn from it. And then I realized later on that less was more, for me to be able to. And the Sydney Olympics was the best Olympics I'd run out of all 3 of them. My performances across the board, the times I ran, was the best out of the whole 3. So it worked out in the end.
And so what about your nutrition and recovery around that training? What was your...
Yes. Yeah, that's key too. That was really key. I worked with a nutritionist, and I worked with a new one going to the Sydney Olympics, where we completely changed, because when I talked to you about how you warm up, stretching, nutrition had changed as well, continues to change. So I was like more about having carbs and, you know, a little bit of protein, and then it changed to having more protein and little carbs. And again, I think that's up to the individual athlete. But yes, the last 12 months going into the Sydney Olympics, I completely changed my eating, and it worked for me, for sure, on so many levels. So it played a really big part, for sure.
Have you maintained a lot of those principles of your obviously you're probably not training to the same extent as you were then now, but you've talked a lot about how, you know, running's helped you overcoming the grief of losing your mum and that kind of thing. Have you maintained a lot of those kind of principles of training now? And I know that you've run.
Well, sometimes my daughter thinks I still being an elite athlete, because I don't eat pasta or anything. She goes, "Mum." I actually went to, I don't look like an elite athlete, I can assure you, but I ended up, when you were talking about my mum, our beautiful mum, when mum passed away, after having the kid, two beautiful children, Nick and Gabriella, I did put on a bit of weight again. And then I was trying to lose weight. So I went to the dark side and started doing long distance running, which is hilarious to all my athletic friends because I never used to jog 2 laps. So I started doing half marathons. And then when our beautiful mum passed away, I became ambassador for Can2, which is just such an amazing organization where you can sign up to run a half marathon, a marathon, 10K, whatever it may be. And what they do is they give you training, they give you a program over a period of time, and you raise money for cancer research. So I started doing that and I absolutely loved it. So even today, I've been for a run this morning. I probably train 5 days a week still in the mornings. I have to have a day off now and then because, I get plantar fascia stuff and I got to give my body a bit of a break. But yeah, I love training. I really do. And I go to a place called Chocolate Box Training. Love that because it's hard. So I do that at least twice a week. Should be 3 times, but I do love that as well. So yes, it's definitely part of my life.
And it's fantastic that you can give back to the young kids as well and, helping educate them on their own, technique, running technique and speed and physiological development. Is that also very fulfilling at the moment for you?
Oh my gosh, I just love it. So I'm coaching kids from the age of 7 to 20, 21 now, and I find it so incredibly rewarding. I'm lucky I'm working at 3 schools, which is Pymble Ladies College, Northern Beaches Christian School, and as well as Stella Morris at Manly. And I find it really rewarding. And it's not just for track athletes, it's for any kid who wants to learn to run fast for any sport. So I get such joy out of it because, these kids are great kids and they're just, if I can make changes to their technique, it can just make a difference in any sport they do, but also in their confidence as well. So, I love it. I love being a part of it. And I have my MLGT explosive speed clinics and go out to country areas. I'm going to try and do that these holidays. And the country kids are amazing as well. Like going out to the country, they have such appreciation. And I think also because I'm a country girl, I love being out there. So, it's funny. It's become my full-time job now because, before COVID hit, I was doing some MC work and, doing some TV work. And then when things all changed, this has now become probably more my full-time job. And, I love it. It's really good.
It's so good
I love helping others.
Yeah. And like you're also national selector for track and field. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if you're doing that currently, but definitely with the Rio Olympics in 2016.
That's right. Yeah, I did that for about 10 years. So I stood down beginning of last year, I think it was. But yeah, that was great. I enjoyed that too, being part of it. And I think it's really important for everyone to put back in their sport and to be able to help others. So that was a great experience. I worked with 2 other great selectors. So I loved that. But now I'm enjoying just more being a coach and just seeing these young athletes develop. That's probably more the thing that I enjoy most. I'm not really all that interested in the elite side of things of athletics. I'm more interested in the pathways. And like one of the things is we realize being a teenager is so difficult. If I see my athletes, my teenagers turn up, that just makes me happy, because I just think it's so important for them to be involved in sport. And I feel like my job is to keep them invested in the sport. And if I can do that till they become like a teenager and an adult, then I feel like I've done my job. So that's the part that I love about it. And just about every one of them giving it a go, no matter what level they're at. I just love that doing that.
Getting in there and having a crack.
Having a crack. That's all you have to do.
Although you said you're not as invested in the elite side of things these days and more so, the development pathways and that kind of thing. In your experience, which athletes, track athletes mainly, or, any for that matter, have you had the privilege of working with to develop their performance and speed? And, who's probably, 1 or 2 that you can think of who are probably the most, gifted or talented at a young age?
Well, I've got one athlete. I started coaching when she was 9 years old. Her name's Christy Edwards. And I've just loved watching. She's now represented Australia at relay. She's actually just been selected in the Australian 4x1 100-meter relay squad. So I get a lot of joy seeing her, and she's really starting to run well again, which I just think is fantastic. So that's my own little personal thing of being a part of her career. And that's one of the things, like sometimes Jackie and I are a very unique situation where we've been together over a long period of time. But I think with coaches who have been with young athletes, they still play a really big part to those who hopefully go and achieve it as well. So yes, Christy is someone, and she's been running so well. And they've got the Sydney Track Classic coming up on the, oh gosh, I don't know when we're going to have this podcast going to be on, but not this weekend, the next weekend. So she's going to be running there. So that'll be fantastic. Yeah, to see her there.
And we can pop all of your, I say this for all guests, but pop all your links and plug anything that you want to promote, you know, whether it be Mel GT speed clinics or your social media platforms. So I'll pop all those in the show notes so people can access.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. The one thing too, as well, Hayden, that we're also involved in, you're talking about young athletes that are coming up. In our group, there's myself and I've got another coach, Katie Edwards, and we've got some para athletes. So we've got this young para, we've got two, Sabella Wharton and Marley Lovell. And Marley Lovell has actually just qualified for the Para World Championships, which she'll be competing in at the end of the year. So that's one thing that I just love. And I actually would love to get other para athletes to come down and train with us at Narromine. That's an area that I would, because I think there are probably kids out there that don't even know that this is a possibility. So that's one thing that we've loved being a part of as well. So it'd be great to get some young para athletes involved in the sport as well.
It'd be great to learn more about that too. I'm probably, you know, the only real track athlete Paralympian that I can think of is Oscar Pistorius, but obviously we don't delve too much into that story. But yeah, it's like that must be fulfilling as well. To be working
but it's just great to have those options there. So good.
Yeah. In terms of your media and corporate work as well, like I remember seeing you, you know, on Sundays on the Nine's Wide World of Sports, you know, with Kenny Sutcliffe and the team. You know,
that was so much fun. I loved that. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it looked like an awesome experience. You know, you got a whole host of different personalities on there, and you know, who have you enjoyed working with, and what particular, you know, platforms? Like obviously you've had a lot of involvement with Channel 9. I understand you even did a 20-1 season in 2000.
Yeah, that's right. It was fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I had so much fun. I did a lot of work for Nine for many years, and it was just fantastic. As you said, Kenny Sutcliffe on Wide World of Sport. I got to do the Olympics with them, which was in London, one of the best experiences of my life. I got to call with Peter Donegan, who's one of the best commentators I've ever worked with. So I've been very lucky at that. And then I did some work on Fox Sports on the Bill and Boz show, which I loved. I mean, there's so many areas that I have had the experience on. One thing when you leave your sport of running is that when you're in a major competition, the adrenaline's running, you know, racing, obviously. And when you leave the sport, that's probably one area you really miss. But the one thing about live television, your adrenaline is firing. So I loved having that. That was a really great replacement for me to have that adrenaline pumping for sure.
Post-career, definitely getting involved in that TV.
Yeah, it was so good.
You even did some Kellogg's. You did some Kellogg's commercials. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I had this one commercial. It's hilarious. It was called Mel's Perfect Thighs. It was some thigh machine.
Oh goodness.
It's probably one I shouldn't talk about.
Oh, nothing's you just keep everything in these podcasts. So whatever you want to share, man, nothing's off limits.
Oh, so funny. Yeah, I did Mila. It was it was really good. No, look, I've had some wonderful experiences. There's no doubt about it. One thing now looking back is I should have enjoyed being overseas a lot more. I mean, I loved it at the time, but I think you always get homesick and want to get home, and now all I want to do is get over there. So that's why I watch these Diamond Leagues, and I just go, oh, life is so good. It was so much fun, and I love seeing all these, young athletes and young Australian athletes being a part of it. I just go, oh, how good is that?
Another great lesson for young people, isn't it? To,
Yeah.
hindsight's a great thing. You want to try and enjoy the moment. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you talked about, I guess we talked a little bit about your role in the media as well, but, some other, high profile personalities or journalists that come to mind, Erin Molan, Yvonne Sampson, Mel McLaughlin, who did the Big Bash on Channel 10, Lara Pitt on Fox Sports, Danica Mason. So there's quite a large cohort of females now in and around sport that have quite a large presence. It's really exciting to see, isn't it? That, females, even we were talking before about how it was a while before you got to a point where you could this became your full-time job, running and competing, and, you had to work on the side to get ends meet. But it's awesome now that females have such an opportunity to be able to, play the sport they love and make a living, be on TV, share their thoughts and ideas, and be so involved. It's great, isn't it?
Oh, look, it's wonderful. And you've mentioned all those women, and they're smart, intelligent, well-educated women. That's the one thing too that you love, is that, when you're getting people that are taking on these roles, they know their stuff. And I think that's, really key as well. But talking about female sport, that's one thing I've noticed over years, how it's just getting so much more attention. I mean, just to see, the women's AFL, like what they're doing there, getting more attention to the Big Bash, to cricket, to, football. There's so many areas now. And I know that even with the rugby sevens, I've got a whole lot of athletes who are wanting to be part of that program, which is wonderful too. So yeah, women's sport is definitely improving enormously. They're getting a lot of more attention, media attention. I think also to social media allows them to get a lot more scope for media, attention as well. So yeah, it's great to watch. It's great to see.
One of them that we didn't mention also was Debbie Spillane with ABC Grandstand as well.
One of the best.
Yeah,
oh, yes.
Long time.
You're listening to her, all the time when I was out at Narromine, because the ABC would be on a lot. Yeah, she's one of the icons, isn't she?
Iconic,
especially.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Iconic for sure. No, she's fabulous.
What have you experienced any challenges in that respect? Being a female, we talked about, early in your career, obviously, having to work part-time, or we haven't really discussed that, but working on the side whilst training and trying to fit in your training routine. Also any other challenges you've faced, coming into media and working in television?
No, I think, look, people ask me, did you struggle being a female, in the sport of track and field? The thing was, we never did, because we were just lucky we're in the area that Kathy Freeman and I were racing, being competitive week in and week out. So we actually were doing well on the track. So we were getting a lot of media attention. And I think because we had that competition week in and week out, and we had all these, what they called Grand Prix around Australia. And the actual Australian female track and field team was very successful. So in our sport, we didn't really feel it at the time, because, we were getting the results. So we're very lucky like that. I don't feel as though we missed out by any means, and had a lot of support. And also too, we had the Sydney Olympics coming up. So then there was a lot more money in the sport because those Olympics was coming up. So then we did get the sponsorships that you needed to be able to run. But yes, when you're young and you're proving yourself, it is really hard to, I used to work at the Regent Hotel. I worked in a fish and chip shop. I worked in a sports store. I was just doing what I could do to, to be able to work, not being on my feet too long to then be able to train. But it's still very difficult by any means. So once you become you get those sponsorship and be able to train, recover, train, it makes a massive difference to your performance for sure.
Almost just trying to keep your dream afloat, isn't it, at work?
Yeah.
And
I was lucky. Sorry, I was very lucky because I had the support of my mum and dad. They could help me with that. They they luckily bought a unit in Sydney that my brother and I could live at. We paid $50 a week for rent. Actually, I'm not even sure if I probably paid it regularly. So we were very well, and my parents worked hard. Like, they were farmers. They've been through drought. They've been through a lot of hard times themselves, but they sacrificed things to allow us to do that and allowed me to follow my dreams. So I was very lucky, for sure.
Yeah, I think any of the listeners who haven't met the Gainsfords, we could pull the whole family on here and do an enormous podcast, couldn't we?
You could definitely. We could take up hours.
But yeah, so it's so good to hear, I guess, as we were talking about before, the great developments, including things like the NRLW, Super W, AFLW, women's opportunities in sport. But also in terms of your coaching clinics, have you noticed an increase in the number of young female athletes coming to you for coaching and assistance?
Oh, I don't know an increase, but I do have a lot, for sure. I think the biggest thing is with female athletes, it's trying to get them through those teenage years. I think that's the biggest part, because as they grow up, they're wanting to party, go to parties, what's important, what's not important, trying to be cool with their friends. How does their friends react to them wanting to train? So I actually think with females, it's probably males too, don't get me wrong, but if we're talking about the females, it's just keeping them invested in that teenage years. Because when they're young, it's easy. They're all, friends. They're making friendships, which is great through team sports. And that's one of the things I have to make sure with my group. Athletics is a individual sport, but if I create a good environment that when they're turning up and they're training with their friends, then they'll want to keep doing it, and that's, I think, is really important. So with females, I think it's really important to make them feel empowered when they're teenagers, and tell them it's great that you're out here, you're being fit and healthy. Yes, maybe you want to go and party, that's fine, but don't ever sit down and think what if, because you can later on get on later in life and think, geez, I can't even tell you how many people have said to me that they used to run, or they used to run around when I did, but I gave up because of drinking that, and then they wish they didn't, because they look at other people not doing that. And as I always say, if you go to Olympics, the after party is very, very good. So it's worth the sacrifice of maybe giving up a party or two to be able to get that incredible experience.
Yeah, is there anything you want to disclose about the after parties? Again,
No.
Cut, there's
You know what they say, what
can of
goes on
worms.
tour stays on tour.
So, what services does Mel GT Clinic? It's a great name as well. It just sounds fast. The
Yeah,
title, doesn't
explosive speed clinic.
Mel GT, yeah. What services do you offer? Is it a mix of like one-to-one, group-based service? Like,
Well, so when I do my explosive speed clinics, that goes for 3 hours, and that's generally within the holidays. And that's the one that I can also travel into the country areas and interstate with. I've got my group sessions during the week, which is Monday through to Thursday. I have a 4 o'clock group, which is usually primary school kids, and then I have a 5 o'clock group, which is high school kids. I don't do a lot of one-on-ones, mainly because of timing, but I feel it's important for kids to be in a group setting myself, because once I feel like they're going to enjoy themselves, secondly, they'll actually train harder, and thirdly, they'll get challenged a lot more. And, putting in that an hour's work doesn't seem like an hour to them. So, so that's what I do generally, and I do it all year round. I do it, from January all the way through to December, because luckily in our sport, we've got little athletics, or you've got senior athletics, which is in the summer season. Then you go into sort of the winter season, and then all the school carnivals happen. And you get to December where they have New South Wales all schools or Australian all schools. So it's all year round, which is perfect.
In some previous episodes, I've talked with Hayden Quinn about his ability to travel with his work and cooking, and how great that is. And, you traveling with your TV work, as an athlete, but also I know that you have your retreat in Magnetic Island that you've run with Destination
Oh,
Adventures.
yeah.
So like traveling
Yes.
around and being able to deliver these clinics must be exciting. And as you said before, traveling back home, Western New South Wales into the country to
Yeah.
deliver some clinics. It must be fulfilling and enjoyable to give back, but also travel around and.
Yeah, look, I absolutely love it. And look, ideally, I'd love to be able to have a sponsor to do so I could do more of it, because, like getting in a lot of those areas, obviously the cost of travel would be great to, like, I'd fly, the accommodation for a few days. But when I can do it, yes, I absolutely love it. And it's the experience of meeting new families, new friends. As I say, going into the country, the kids have a real feeling of what's the word I'm trying to say? When you're there, they really appreciate it that you've come. And a lot of the parents say we don't usually get these opportunities. And the nicest thing is too, I could be going up like I end up going up at 3 and that, and then you'll end up being at the state championships, and you run into these kids and you say hi, and then so you have this sort of connection with them after as well, which is really great. Oh, and then you watch their progress, and you see how well they're going, and it's fantastic.
And so we've sort of talked about your role in helping young individuals at the moment and developing their physiological potential, whether it be running or other sports. But on the side as well, you mentioned you're also doing not as much of the sprinting side of things these days, a bit more longer endurance kind of running on the dark side. I'm not probably as well informed or in the loop with the runners in terms of what that relates to being on the dark side, but
a sprinter doing long distance is a big no-no. Oh. That's why. So doesn't happen a lot.
You've done the half marathon on the Gold Coast in July 2011. Do you have any other events that you got your eye on that you're going to work towards?
I sort of I wouldn't mind doing Noosa actually, but I had a torn plantar fascia, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners has been through this.
Yeah.
When you got a plantar fascia issue, it's massive. It takes forever. So I was in a boot. So I'm just coming back from that. It took me probably nearly 12 months to get over that, which was a bit frustrating. So I'm back now running, but I'd love to do something again. I'd love to do something with Can2 again. I think I'd like to do another half marathon. So whether it's up on the Gold Coast again, because I love that because it's flat. Because one of the things coming back from being a sprinter, that's why I can't sprint anymore. I've torn my Achilles so often that now it flares up. So I can't do a lot of hills. If I'm running uphill, it really aggravates it. So I try to keep off the hills if I can. So Gold Coast is pretty flat. So that might be a goal I'd like to do possibly in July if I can get back to it again.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep our eyes out to see how you do with that.
It won't be fast, so don't worry. You'll be able to see it. It'll be slow.
But aside from all your achievements, the listeners have heard, in the intro, and as we've gone through your experiences in the different Olympics, you've achieved so much. But I guess you say your probably your biggest achievements in life have been your beautiful family. So Nicholas and Gabriella and your husband Mark. So you can tell us a bit more about how that's influenced your life.
Oh, well, I think one of the things, Mark and I got together when I was 19. So he's been through the whole journey of being an athlete and put up with me throughout the whole process, which has been fantastic. I've been very lucky. And then, just having Nick and Gabriella, I just absolutely adore them. They're definitely the best thing I've ever done in my life. And even now, Nick's 20 and Gabriella's nearly turning 18. I just couldn't imagine not having them. So I think that's my most important job, is being a mum to them by far. And I've loved watching them grow and develop, and they're really great kids. So we're very lucky. We've got such great kids. Yeah, the best for sure.
Do they get into the running as the sprinting as well? Well,
actually, Nick is really quick. But I couldn't. He wasn't that keen on actually sprinting. He's pretty quick. He plays soccer now. He was playing rugby, but we had a couple of injuries there. So thankfully he's not doing that again. So he's playing soccer again, which is great. So he's very, very quick on the field. I'd love to get him to run. I reckon he'd do pretty well. Gabriella does love her running. She did her ACL playing netball 2 years ago and then did this incredible bracing protocol where she didn't have surgery and the ACL reattached.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, it was an incredible, I mean, it's going to be published, I think, with Melbourne University, but she then won the under 20s 100 and 200 meters last week, which was pretty special. So she's definitely gone through the resilient side of thing of coming back from an injury, like very much like what I did, and just to see her just achieve that last weekend after everything she's been through was pretty special, I must admit. Yeah, for sure.
Great that she's got that resilience, and congratulations to her. We might, if I can, I might see if there's any, protocol papers or any information about that research that's.
I will. Apparently, it's being published soon, so you probably have to get published first, and then it's incredible. Yeah. And the story behind it's incredible, and what she had to do was pretty. Like, I can't even believe now she did it, to be honest with you, because it's not easy. So, she did everything right to do it. So one thing she is resilient, I can assure you.
Really
for
fascinating.
Sure.
And I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, once it's all published, I'll let you know, and I can tell you all about it.
Yeah, for sure. What was the best piece of advice you ever received?
I've had a lot, but I think my dad used to say, and still does, you can't buy experience at the corner store. And I think that's in everything in life. Sometimes you can tell people things, but sometimes they just got to experience it to learn it as well. And once you learn it, I think that's how you grow and develop, and it brings the best out of you in the end. So I think that's very true.
Fantastic. And I guess the best advice you could give to any young athletes out there trying to fulfill their dreams?
Fulfill their dreams, I would say consistency. There's key factors for it. Okay, one is consistency. The other one's hard work. You need to love it. You really need to love what you do. You need to be resilient, and which also goes with to never give up. So, you will talk about kids who have talent, but they may have talent, but if they haven't got the hard work, the dedication, and the mental strength, then it's not going to all come together. So I sort of look back on my career and I know you said that I ran quick when I was 14. I said it too when I was 14, but I wasn't a star kid, if that makes sense. So I see now in athletics, there's these star kids, and there was a lot of kids that were big names, and I look at record books now as kids, and then you think, where were they later? And there's a reason that some are there later and some aren't. And it's just not talent. It's attitude as well as hard work and consistency. So it makes a big difference. And if they've got all that and they put all that together, I think anything's possible, for sure.
So that hard work, grit,
consistency, attitude, resilience. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Really, and love. But you got to love it. Passion.
Got to love it. Got to enjoy it. Got to be passionate about it.
Got to enjoy it. Like I say to my athletes, I want you to get on that starting line and smile, because if you enjoy it, then everything else is going to come together.
Everything will follow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast today, Mel. I think we'll leave it there.
Pleasure.
It's been an absolute awesome conversation. I'm sure the listeners will really enjoy it.
I hope so. Lovely to chat to you. Thanks for asking me on.
All right. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks. See you.